Good evening. This is the January 8th, 2025 City of Sunbury Services Committee meeting. Could I get a roll call, please?
Mr. Happel.
Here.
Mayor St. John.
Here.
Mr. Ayer. Here. Mr. Grumney.
Here.
For present, we have quorum.
Could I get a motion for approval of the minutes from the December 4th meeting?
Motion.
Motion by Mr. Grumney,
So move.
second by Ms. Strayer. Roll call.
Mayor St. John.
Yes.
Mr. Ayer. Yes. Mr. Grumney.
Yes.
Mr. Happel.
Abstain.
3 yeas, minutes passed.
All right. We get to dive right into stormwater management, I believe. Who's going to be presenting on that?
That will be me.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Carla, I think will get us started on that. We're not going, the plan is not to walk through the entire stormwater legislation.
Okay.
Again, I think what we really want to do is focus a little bit on the enforcement and escalation provisions. So,
Okay.
So with that,
So at the council meeting tonight, you will hear the first reading for the erosion and sediment control standards. So for this meeting, we'd like to focus a little bit more on enforcement and the escalation process that will be part of this new legislation. This is just a very high-level overview of what the new legislation flow will be when it comes to a warning or a violation. So once a warning is issued, the third-party inspector will reach out to the developer with the remediation requirements. They'll also give them a time period to fix the problem. That time period could be 3 days, 7 days, 10 days, and is typically something that has a designation in the SWIP, which you'll hear me say a few times. A SWIP is a stormwater pollution prevention plan. So that's where they get the guiding rules for how much time they typically should take to do that remediation. And then in addition to that, when we move forward, that inspection will also have pictures. If you go to the next task, it would be once the third-party inspector has documented the remediation efforts with pictures to show whether or not they actually performed the remediation that was required, they can then either approve it or they can escalate it to the city if it's unacceptable or non-compliant. At this point, it would be considered a second warning. The next step would be to, again, escalate it to the city. So in the last flow chart bubble, we have what the city can do. And that would be, we could go out and inspect the site ourselves. We could also direct the third party to issue a new timeline for corrections. We could stop the work up to 90 days. That's probably one of the more severe options that this new legislation will empower either the city administrator or the city engineer to do, if as long as we give that message in writing. But also we will have the ability to take corrective measures ourselves. There will be some funds generated due to the fee structure in the legislation. So therefore, if it gets to the point where we, the city, feel that we need to get out and do the correction ourselves, whether it's sweeping streets or fixing any sort of inlet protection, we'll have the ability to go out and do that. And then finally, we can pursue penalties. And in the legislation, there is a whole section on that topic, and we'll touch on it later. I also wanted to mention that for chronic warnings, that's something we want to make sure we're going to be very proactive with. So I'd already mentioned some of these remediation items, you know, cleaning the streets, fixing a silt fence, whatever it is, we'll have a timeline associated with it. So 3 days, 7 days, 10 days. We want our third-party inspection team to look for chronic issues. We don't want the developer to only fix something that we're going to have to tell them every 3 days, every 7 days, that it's the same problem and they only ever react to the problem. So that's going to be something we'll be looking for with the third party.
I want to clarify
Sure.
too. It primarily driven by resident complaints, right? Are we also keeping an active eye on the new developments? Because not every development has a mayor and two councilmen living in it, to trigger the complaint. So,
Yeah, I was just gonna say, and then you can add to this. I mean, Kate or Carla and I have been talking a lot about this. I mean, I think what we want to note is that a resident could drive the complaint. But if a resident is driving the complaint, then I don't think our third party inspector is doing what it is that we want them to do. So they ought to be identifying the issues. They ought to be identifying, not only issues, but documenting the issues. And again, identifying the remediation period following up. But I think the reason we've got that up there is just so that, I mean, that is another way to accept receipts and process. But again, wouldn't anticipate that it's primarily resident driven.
got it.
I just have a couple questions real quick.
No, go ahead.
For the first warning and after the third party inspector documents remediation, is the city provided the photographs and that, even though they're not the ones enforcing at that point, but they're kept in the loop? Okay.
Yes, we will receive any of the inspection reports that are done. And we currently, without this legislation, received a weekly report, which is a requirement for the development from the EPA. Everybody has to do a weekly inspection on these construction. So they are compliant as far as they have someone themselves. On the next slide, I'll get into a little bit on, what the process is right now and the differences with an example.
Okay.
I think that might help clarify.
And you may cover this later, but so it could be anywhere between, 0 to say 30 days before something actually happens. Is the third party or is the builder responsible for communicating with the development to let them know rather than complaints still coming in, even though there's a plan in place to get it remediated? So I don't know, because I'm just thinking that if on day 3, they don't see anything happening, day 7, they don't see anything happen. Now Sunbury is giving them the second warning. And now they've got, I don't know what the time period is after the second warning, but say it's a week, 2 weeks. I mean, it could be a month before residents see something happening, assuming we're having to go down that path. So I don't know if we make the builder responsible for getting something out to the residents or if we ask the third party to. I'm not sure how that works. Or if it makes sense.
So we will have the ability to work on the front end for future developments, future phases on sites to try to write into our language what we want the requirement to be. And if that includes a resident notification process, we can do that. Typically, what I've seen on most SWIPs is more of a remediation to actually do the repair work and not notification. But we certainly have the ability that if it's going to take more than X number of days, 7 days, because they try and do that time period designation for whatever corrective action it is
Right.
in a way that makes sense and actually gives them the capability to do the repair that is needed.
Right.
But we could say, you know what, we know this is a problem, let's send out a notification, but that would be something, in my opinion, we would want to have on that front end document so that when our third party inspector goes out into the field, they can say, and this is in the SWIP and why we are telling you it has to be done.
Right, because I'm wondering after the second, if they don't do it on the first notification, by the time the second rolls around, if that was part of the condition, that may motivate them on the front end to get done because they don't want to go through the process. The builders don't want to having to notify all the residents that it might be just an additional incentive to get done before having to go to that process. But or if it doesn't work out that way too, that's fine also. I just throwing it out there.
Oh, I think it's a great idea. That's the nice part about us having more control and more oversight on the SWIP with this new legislation. And I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but we will be able to look for proactive measures that we can take into account for the developer, but also what makes sense for our city.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, no. I think it's already asked you guys. So this is a really quick example with actual photos of construction sites in recent time for our current legislation.
We can advance.
You want me to?
Oh, let's just.
I think it went forward one.
Did?
It did. I went. Go down. Go down. I've only got one slide. It's on the same slide. Do you want to review?
It's the same slide for, it's the same
Yeah,
slide
it's
for
the
both.
same slide in the packet, but essentially I am using the same pictures in the first example. So I can go through it, but not follow the current flow chart for anybody that's watching online that is being shown right now. Our current policy has a much more reactive, back and forth methodology. So, under that very top, bright yellow bubble, indicates that I had mentioned they're currently compliant, supplying a once a week report, for the inspection of these construction sites. That is something currently that, we haven't found has been an issue. The biggest problem that we've found is that they're doing the paperwork, but there isn't much accountability. There might be a warning, but it might also be a warning that is 30 days past due. And really the follow through on that, which, is going to fall back, on the city for our legislation to follow through with in the future. But right now, what that is looking like is reactive. Resident or, someone in our community reaches out and says, hey, we have a problem on a street. Can you go out and take a look? So that's when the city is going out, typically one of our staff members. And we are assessing and letting the developer know that the site's a mess. You need to clean the street and maybe fix some of your silt fence. It's usually not much of a check mark. We don't have like a list or anything, staff members at this point, that we go out and do ourselves. So it's really the developer doing whatever it is we verbally tell them to do. And hopefully within a time period that is reasonable, if we even give a designated time. Typically, we're asking them, hey, when do you think you'll be out there to sweep and clean up? And it's a conversation about when they'll actually see some action on site. The other thing that is happening right now, before this legislation comes out, is when it gets to the point where the roads look like the top picture, that is going to trigger a meeting which the administrator and myself had with the developer to sit down and discuss what can be done to remedy the situation. And really, it's a matter of compliance, maybe coming up with a few items that are actionable. And then with the understanding that we're going to have new legislation coming out and that there's going to be additional penalties that we'll be pursuing. So right now, it's a very much so back and forth, a lot of discussions between city staff and the developer on site. With the new legislation, again, I would start with that very top dark brown box that the warning is issued. So essentially, the road looks one of the pictures on the left side, or even it doesn't have to be the road, just so you're aware. It could be that the actual lot is in disarray as well. And they've been told they need to have some sort of actionable item, clean the streets, add silt fence, add sock, repair the gravel in the construction entrance, whatever it may be. Once the warning is issued, they then have to remedy that within the time period, which will be followed up by a third party. And I know I keep throwing out the word third party inspector, but I think one of the key things to notice that we will be doing that is in this legislation, the city is planning on hiring our own third party inspection team and utilizing the fees and the deposit in the legislation in order to pay for that oversight. So we'll have a lot more control. Sure, it could be weekly, that's the minimum requirement, but we can also say, we would like you to go out there every 3 days after any warning to make sure that it's been done. We can look at that and be flexible so that it is actually accomplishing what we want to see in a neighborhood. There is a caveat in the legislation that gives a developer the option to request their own third party, but it's at our discretion whether or not we would ever allow that. There could be an example where we would, but our intent and our plan is to hire our own.
But can I ask a reason for the caveat? If we feel like there'd be not a realistic chance we would do that, why do we give them that option?
One of the feedback items that we received from the BIA, when we reached out with the legislation for feedback, was that there were concerns that if the city wanted to utilize our own third-party inspection team, it would be much more expensive than what they could do themselves. I mean, we're going to be charging these fees, and there's no indication that we would waive the fees if they use their own third-party inspection team, but there are likely agreements out there in place with some of these third parties and just that comfort level with who they've been working with.
I want to strike that from the
Yeah, I
legislation.
would say so.
Any option of that, the BIA represents the home builders, not the city.
But the only caveat I would say is if we did get into a situation where our third party could not handle, we might have to look at additional contracts, but that,
Yeah, I know.
as long as we're holding our own ownership.
Can we do this in-house too? I mean, if the cost benefit is there, I mean, I assume large cities have internal inspectors and people that can street sweep and things like that. I know we're small now, but
Yeah, no, it definitely does allow for that. Let me just add, I mean, the BIA did ask that question. Actually, it was in there before the BIA asked that question. In fact, they were saying, we think you ought to have this as an option. We said, well, actually, the legislation that we used a model legislation from another community that already had that in there. So I just want to make sure it wasn't put in there because the BIA asked it to be put in there. It was put in there because it came from the sample legislation we had from another community. So that said, it's our legislation, not theirs. And so, you know, if that's where we want to land, we can make that amendment.
I think we need to remove that.
Okay.
We should have the ability to make that amendment.
Yeah.
Well, I guess at this point it hasn't been approved. So yes, we should be able to edit that before approval.
Yep.
Plus, all these conversations and warnings, that's a heck of a lot of silt going down those drains. And every day that goes by, that's a lot of silt and that's a lot of damage going into the water system. And I think they should pay.
Yeah, you are absolutely right. There are downstream controls typically, some of those sediment basins, but
Obviously
that's a
not
lot
here.
of work to remediate at the end of the project too. So it's also in their best interest to maintain it and not rely on what is considered the last measure before it hits the public system. No, but you are absolutely right.
Okay.
You said we can increase the frequency of like a reevaluation to 3 days versus 7 days.
Yes.
I mean, is that up to our discretion? Who makes that call and how does that work?
So
We've warned them and now we're going to do what?
we, with our own third-party contract, we can designate in the separate contract that, you know, they need to meet the minimum requirements of 1 week, or we may request that they inspect on a more frequent basis. Depending on the language and who we end up choosing to do that, they may look at that and say, ooh, well, we can budget for once a week, but we're going to actually assume that you need us twice a week. So that would be reflected in what they estimate their contract would be. And then when they bill back, they only bill back the hours that they actually use. But it's just a matter of setting up that contract. Does that make sense?
Not 100%, but I'm trying to think of a use case. This situation happens. In future state, we've got a third-party inspector that said this is absolutely terrible. I mean, it's still not fixed. You know, they need silt fences, they need, dandy bag clean out, they need street sweeping daily, they need mud scraping, all this stuff that we've been talking about for months. What happens and why do we even have to have like a discretionary measure in there where we have to increase it? It's almost like you should have an inspector out there every day at this point, looking and saying you're not fixed. Now we're fining you.
I think.
Now we're charging you
I agree.
$1,000 a day, $5,000 a day, $10,000 a day. Until somebody gets the message, you either need to hire more oversight,
Or don't do that.
buy more equipment, fix the problem. I mean, I can't figure out where the discretion should come up. It should be like a flow chart. If you don't fix this, this happens. If you don't fix this, this happens.
Is it written into the contract when they are awarded this neighborhood with the city? Do they sign some type of, here's what we expect out of you, and they have to sign like a contract? This is how it's gonna be, and if this happens every day, you will be fined $1,000 if this continues.
About the $1,000, but I know there's stormwater references in the engineer's approved plans.
From the SWIP document. So
Penalties.
that is something that we could proactively put in there if we could include additional inspection requirements. But then it would fall back on our contract to have somebody out there or an additional in-house staff member to do that on a more regular basis, to make sure that we're staying on top of the site.
Yeah. I was going to add, I mean, I think she's got this on, if it's not the next slide, it's after that. I mean, one of the other advantages of the new legislation is that when they develop the SWIP, with the assistance of, again, a technical advisor, a third-party consultant, whomever, who has stormwater management knowledge, maybe a little bit more than we do. One of the things that is in there is the notion that we would actually have them also help us review the stormwater management plan to make sure that it reflects, the best practices. And so, and that there's consistency in the requirements across developers, across communities. Right now, that's not happening. So I think, as you were alluding to, Mayor, there are references in the engineering plan about their stormwater management practices. But again, it's not always been consistently applied from subdivision to subdivision. It's been based upon the engineering review. And this, I think, will help us, again, get more clarity, consistency in the stormwater management plan, and our expectations will be reflected in those plans in a way that they haven't been up to this point.
Yeah, it's a matter of balancing the requirements of the EPA, which a lot of people take as a minimum requirement, but also what we expect in the city. And that's where we can really look ahead at these developments and try to be more proactive with what we're trying to do. Daryl hit on it, consistency. We can look at a phased approach that was, I think it's the fourth bullet down. If we wanted to look at a neighborhood build out and say, once it's at 30% occupancy, we want to have certain requirements, more frequent sweeping. If it gets to 50%, it needs to be every other day. If it gets to 75%, it's daily. The contractor's cleaning up after themselves at every site on every job. Reflecting that in the document so that is what is being inspected, and then the inspection documentation then points back to the SWIP. That's where they can be held much more accountable.
Right, and in the SWIP, as I understand it, is also where they define the correction period. You've got 3 days to fix this, you've got 7 days to fix this, right. So again, we can begin to kind of squeeze that number down a little bit as we're approving SWIP plans going forward.
Have we missed the opportunity on Eagle Creek, Price Ponds, Magnolia Park?
The current phases that are under construction, yes, but there are multiple phases that are going to be moving forward. So one of the other places, the very last bullet I've got on here, being able to catch and discuss at that pre-construction meeting and letting them know what our expectations are, even bringing out the SWIP and saying, we want to make sure this is new legislation for us and this is going to be one of our top priorities. Please make sure you understand it. That pre-construction meeting, we also want to include the requirement that they provide a list of subcontractors and people that will be working on site so that we have the names and the contacts. That way, if there is a violation, if we get to the point where we say the city or the city administrator or the city engineer is now providing written notification that up to 90 days, there's no earthwork done on site, which is in the legislation, we can then reach out to all those contacts so that nobody can say, you know, whether it's Pulte or whoever it is, oh, I'm sorry, my sub didn't know, I didn't get a chance to let them. We will be able to reach out and say, this is a problem.
You said no earthwork. Was that an example, or is that like really what the like what could be stopped?
Yes, so it is earthwork and any work that involves moving soils and disturbance is the way that it is described. That does include driving onto the site with vehicles and that access. So that would need to be controlled as well.
Like a roofer that has a lift that's not driving on the gravel driveway and dragging mud in and out onto the street.
Yes.
Yeah, I just feel like these penalties need to be, for lack of a better word, severe to get attention, because these big companies, clearly they're thumbing their nose at the city right now because they're not taking care of the problem. And it's extremely frustrating. And what I keep thinking about, at some point down the road, they're going to come back to us with another development plan or an idea, and this is going to stick in my mind. For sure.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Cost to clean those.
Yeah.
And that's where we can be on the proactive end, trying to update that SWIP and really let them know this is going to be what we follow with the violations, in addition to the penalties that are seen. We will have that fee structure and that deposit. So we will have the ability, if it gets really bad, to get in there and do some work.
Is there an opportunity to, for lack of a better term, force the developer at some point to come and explain to council what's going on and what's going on there? I mean, to make them accountable in front of council for what they're doing or not?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about that, I think, a little bit at a prior session. I mean, if we want to bring a member of the developer in, I certainly will invite them. We'll make room on the schedule
I'm
to do
just
that.
saying it for me. If nobody else wants to, that's fine, but
I think building off of that, just a commitment to respond.
Mhm.
Like, you have 24 hours to respond to us. I assume there's something like that built in, right? Or is there?
Yeah, I mean, that's all part of once the inspection's been done, the deficiency hasn't been identified, the correction schedule has been set, they failed to remedy it. Again, that's all sort of, now you're not responding. Now you're moving to the possibility of a shutdown of some sort, or
There's a $2,000 fine per day.
And I didn't
We'll let Dick
necessarily
describe that.
just mean a failure to remedy the situation and response in that way, but maintain communication that we identify that we have had complaints about this.
Well, if it's documented in writing,
Well-
that's all we need.
okay.
And that'll be a key component in that pre-construction meeting, making sure that we have the appropriate contacts for who's responsible for the site. That typically includes a 24/7 contact as well. So that if there is an emergency happening, someone left a Friday evening or is working over the weekend.
That happens all the time.
Yeah,
There's no oversight.
yes. So we can reach out to someone and say, hey, they're out there and someone's got to go out and take a look at it. Because that is one of the things that the developer had mentioned to us, was that, they felt they couldn't be on the site all the time. But we do need them to be responsive.
Did they really say that? Did they literally say that?
Yes,
Supervision of Pulte said that? Okay.
Yes.
yes.
I was just going to build a little bit on the question of have we missed the opportunity in Price Ponds and Eagle Creek? I mean, Carlos said that the expectation is that this applies to newly approved phases. Having said that, the fee structure that we'll collect, that will allow for some funds to help remedy situations that might exist in the existing phases. And when we kind of do the math in our head, I mean, there would be sufficient funds to take some action there. what it wouldn't allow us to do, or not allow us, we wouldn't be able to do the individual lot agreements, right? I mean, that's kind of moving forward. So it, in the legislation is this additional, and maybe you want to talk just a little bit about that.
On that point though, doesn't our existing, I'm gonna call it SWIP, or the plans that we've approved, it does include language that says they must remove debris from the road.
Yeah, it
Yes.
absolutely. They do have a
That's blanket
they
enough
do-
where
Yeah, they do have a SWIP. Everybody's got the
if you
SWIP.
start inspecting this stuff, roads alone, they may not be in somebody's backyard and looking at storm drains in the backyards, but they're gonna be able to go through and notate violations.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes,
We're gonna have them do that.
And we
yes.
should be able to phase it again and say, hey, 7 days is your minimum time for sweeping, but as the community develops, if there's additional construction work going on, we may increase the requirement for sweeping, and we can designate the days, or we can leave it open and say that the city can request multiple times per week, as frequent as daily, or as frequent as at the end of the business day.
And this may be a naive question, but if they drag their feet and they're paying fees and they don't care, is there any provisions to if there's any long-term damage done to our stormwater system that they're held responsible for that or accountable for that, whatever it may be?
So they don't necessarily state that.
Mm.
At the end of a project, there is a checklist that is done for post-construction investigation. And at that point, they are usually told, hey, your sediment pond, you need to possibly dredge it.
Mhm.
Or, you know, if a storm sewer is full of debris, you can request that they clean it. We could ask for cleaning and televising
Mhm.
of any of the infrastructure in the area before we accept it on our end.
Okay,
But that would all need to be in the documents ahead of time.
gotcha. Thank you.
Sure.
All right, so maybe just let Vic talk a little bit about, if we get to the court action. But just again, a quick reminder then, right? So you've got them paying a fee based upon the size of the phase that's being approved. That fee can be used at some point for the city to take action if necessary. But I think we would anticipate that there are work stoppages first before the city takes action. I think because what we don't want to do is create an incentive in which they just say, well, you guys go ahead and take care of it type thing. We want them to take on ownership and responsibility for that. So we would expect that that's the path we follow. Again, if that all doesn't work, again, then you can start to file, in a court of law, misdemeanors. And so I don't know if you want to pick it up there or not.
Sure. Yes, the penalty provisions in the proposed legislation does call for ultimately criminal penalties, which can be enforced as against individuals and an entity. I think it's specified that first offense is a 4th-degree misdemeanor. Failure to cure a notice violation within 45 days would then escalate to a misdemeanor of the 1st degree. So the penalty provisions for those types of misdemeanor, 4th-degree misdemeanor, would be $250 fine, which the legislation sets forth that each day it's an ongoing or a separate offense. And that would be in the case of either of those penalty provisions. So the legislation does provide for that if you're in a situation where I think at that point probably you would be, you've exhausted other alternatives with or repeat offenders, and you're at the point of that. But then, yes, that no differently, that similar to, the zoning code itself has penalty provisions like that, where, Alex would go out and give a warning or a notice for a violation. And then if it's not upheld or not taken care of, then he'd be in touch with me, and then we would get a complaint prepared and served and filed in mayor's court. That's how that happens. So.
What other options around financial penalties are available?
There could be, and it doesn't have specifically civil fine in this legislation. That could be included. I think the deposit, which is collected up front, is kind of similar or provides a similar incentive, I guess, in that there's the call for the minimum of the $2,500. And if they're not doing what they need to do, and we have to go out or have a third party sweep the street, that would be paid for from the deposit. So that's similar to that, but a civil fine schedule could be included to put another financial incentive on them which wouldn't require a criminal complaint being filed, or wouldn't require a case being opened in mayor's court or municipal court. It could be imposed by the city, pursuant, civil, and then could be enforced ultimately in court of common pleas if we had to.
I'd like for staff to look into that in between now and the second and third reading.
So if I'm understanding right, under the way it's currently written, $250 a day is the most we would be able to charge for a penalty under what Mr. Whitney just said, or?
Unless they get to the first degree misdemeanor, which the maximum penalties on that are $1,000. So that would be if we're in that subsequent offenses or failure to cure a notice violation within 45 days.
Right.
That would escalate to a first degree misdemeanor. And so then now you're dealing with $1,000.
So applying that to today's situation, they would be at the $1,000 a day penalty, I'm assuming, since there's been no remediation for months.
I guess potentially, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so that would need to be filed as a first degree misdemeanor under the penalty if we were in that situation, and then get them to court and get
Be
the
done.
judge to agree and impose that penalty. That's
Is
fine.
each infraction or each inspection report counted as its own, issue?
So, well, each such day that the violation, so if it's an ongoing, so in that example, the street's a mess, they're noticed, they're told to cure, they don't cure. So the violation hasn't necessarily changed, but if it's ongoing, that's.
In this case, there's not like one problem that caused that. In stormwater terms, I mean, it's like lack of silt fences, lack of scraping the street, lack of street sweeping, lack of clearing the dandy bags, you could probably hit them with 20 different items that cause this. My question is, we're not going to blanket say, hey, this is a problem. The inspection report's going to call out specific things that they need to remediate. The
Yes.
question are the misdemeanors applied? If they remediate 5 out of the 10, are we taking them for 5 infractions, and those are 5 separate misdemeanors, 5 separate penalty sets?
I guess that could be determined on a case by case basis for sure, but yes, each one of those things could be a separate penalty. It could have a separate complaint filed if regardless of, once the complaint's filed, which is, I guess, a benefit to the extent there is such a thing when you're talking about criminal penalties. If the remediation done after the fact that the complaint is filed doesn't change the fact that the offense happened. So it's that maybe that is something they could use in mitigation as far as trying to lower the penalty, but it doesn't change the fact that you committed this offense. And yes, you've corrected it now, but that it doesn't remove liability, I guess is what I'm saying. So yes, to answer your question, if I understand the question, the individual violations of the SWIP and the ordinance could themselves each be individual complaints, individual charges.
Which is one of the reasons why I think it's very important that our third-party inspection team has a lot of pictures. If there is a violation, we have a picture showing what that violation is. They may correct some of them, but if it's another violation, but we've been able to maybe cross one of the violations, they're compliant for one, we can then say, but they're on their third warning because they're still not, addressing
Right.
silt fence.
Can we have them get GPS coordinates or physical address with those infractions as well?
That is something that at least Delaware County Soil and Water Conservation District, who is the third party we've been at least discussing a potential contract with in the future, they stated that would be something that they would supply as well.
You said there's been multiple warnings already. Has there been a complaint filed?
I've personally filed several complaints. Several of my neighbors had filed complaints. That was another question. Where do I tell my neighbors to go? Do I tell them to go to the Pulte customer service line?
Mm.
Or do I tell them to call the city? What do I have them do?
I would tell them to call the city.
Sorry, I can't hear.
I would have them call the city.
Call the city.
They can reach out to Pulte, but to make sure that we are also documenting it, I would make sure we are involved in that communication.
Yeah, but I just want to note, I mean, our action will probably be to loop the inspector in immediately to again, begin to document it. So.
For the
Yeah.
future. Right
Yeah.
now, though, if you have a neighbor, have them reach out to us.
Okay, thank you.
I know I jumped around a little bit in this presentation. The only other thing I wanted to mention was that future fee collection, deposit, likely going to be in OpenGov, and possibly look at developing a standalone stormwater management permit or something of the like. Could be something that we look at in the future, almost to keep them sourced and separated and part of an approval process as we move forward. But for now, that'll be one of my goals, to make sure that we are implementing, once approved, the new legislation. Any questions?
It's not good for the people who follow the rules, because they're still paying the fee, right?
They are still paying the fee.
All right. Any other questions on stormwater management before we move on? In our little bit of time we have left. Next up is trash hauling contract.
Yeah, I don't know. Caitlin, make sure you turn it on. I'm not sure if we've got the mic on.
It appears to be on,
Okay,
maybe.
great, thank you.
There you go. Good evening, Services Committee. I am just here to go over and let you all know about our current trash hauling contract. It is set to expire on March 31st of this year, so we will be going out for bid. Our goal is to have this posted to our city website under our procurement page this Friday. We are also going to be advertising in the Delaware Gazette. Last time in 2020, whenever we went out for bid with this, we posted twice. So we are going to follow that same protocol this time as well. We are currently with Local Waste is our current refuse provider. The goal with this is to keep our high level of customer service with our trash refuse. But also we want to go out and get competitive bidding so we can get the lowest and best. With that, their new contract will be implemented on April 1st, and it is a 3-year contract with the ability to extend the contract twice for 1 year. With that, if anybody has any questions, please let me know. It was short and sweet, so.
Yeah, so just want you to know that this is going to be out on the street. Once we've identified a contractor, we'll be back in touch, obviously with the Services Committee, to brief you on the proposal, which one we think we will recommend for council approval. And of course, there'll be council action to accept the proposal. So there's some additional steps beyond what's happening now, but this is, again, kind of the first important step. So
Yes, yeah,
great, thanks.
this is just letting you know that we're going out to bid, and then, yes, we will bring it before council and let everybody know what our recommendation is for awarding the bid.
Great, okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, so just a couple of other quick updates for the Services Committee. You also may know, the city is currently receiving feedback from the community regarding our Safe Streets for All project. I think the link is currently on the city website. I've included in the packet the survey questions, so you can see them. If you haven't taken the survey yet, we'd encourage you to do that, and we can get you the link if you need to find that. I think in the administrator's report, I'd indicated that at least through the end of the last calendar year, we'd received 90 responses, and by we, CT Consultants is basically helping us with this project. So there has been a fair amount of community engagement, but we're trying to do what we can to get some additional engagement as well. So not 100% sure when we'll close down the survey, but it is open now. And again, I encourage you to go out and take it if you haven't already. And then we'll be working with the Safe Streets for All committee and be back in touch with the services committee on some recommendations based upon what that report is telling us. The next item I've got on here is we talked about the Sunbury Estates tree and sidewalk project. I just tried to include in the packet a summary of what was accomplished this year. So, I'm not trying to drill this into your head too much, but the long and short of it is that we did remove all of the trees this year. We replaced 84 concrete panels in the sidewalks. We have 14 additional properties where we need to place a tree next year. Those trees were just not available through the nursery to be able to plant this year, but all other trees were planted. We did allow residents an opportunity to opt out and opt in. At the end of the day, 4 residents opted out. And by opting out, basically, they asked not to remove their tree, but we also did not fix their sidewalk, but we've encouraged them to fix their sidewalk in the next 12 months. We'll see how that goes. And we have, at least the original plan was that we would allow residents through 2025 this year to basically still opt in. So there's still a little bit of time for anybody who wants to opt in and get the tree out before it causes any additional damage to their sidewalks to do that. I think we've had 2 residents opt in at this point. So not a lot of folks have been opting in, but again, we've had at least 1 or 2. The other thing about that is the memo does include references to Aaron Noblet and the role that Aaron has helped play with this. So instrumental in terms of identifying the tree, helping to develop the standards in terms of the planting of those trees, and then just sort of monitoring what's happening and advising our service team accordingly. So feel like we've made a lot of progress on this. I don't know that I'll be providing any, too many more updates. I really feel like, again, just expect that there are a few more trees to go up, but for the most part, feel like this is mostly complete. So.
Where do they opt in at if anybody wants to remove it?
So the opt-in, we sent out language to the residents that said contact the city planner if you wanted to opt in, but they contact anyone at the city. So that's Alyssa Graziano. But if they reach out to the city staff, we can get them connected to the right person.
What's our remediation for the folks that opt out? Assuming at this point, there's not a problem there, but in the future, there likely will be, knowing these trees and what the lifespan is on them.
Well, I think our remedy then probably goes back to the enforcement of the sidewalk ordinance,
Right.
And based upon the work that was done last year by the intern. I think one of the recommendations there is for us to take a closer look at our city sidewalk ordinance. It's not perfectly clear about the enforcement process. I mean, there is a process in there, but again, it's not particularly clear and we've not used it. So I think the next step really is for us, we have to look at that ordinance and get back in front of council with something a little bit more clear. And then I think we'd be in a better position to enforce going forward. All right, and then the last thing we've got on here, wastewater treatment plant. I just want to share with the group where we are. A couple of reminders. The bid opening was in early December. We did receive 2 bids. All the bids, or of the 2 bids, they ranged from 31.6 million to 35.1 million. CT Consultants basically went back, took the bids and reviewed them for completeness and the qualifications of the vendors. We have identified an apparent low bidder, but based upon the size of the project, we did invite the apparent low bidder in for a pre-award meeting. During that meeting, we primarily talked about key personnel, project management, and previous experience and qualifications. So we're still assessing the responses to that. The other thing I will note is we are also reviewing the financial plan and I think finalizing the construction administration inspection services. We've been talking a little bit about that to this group, but not a whole lot. So, but I think long story short, we would anticipate that with any luck, we will be back in touch, back in front of council before the end of the month with a recommendation on how to proceed with the wastewater bid. So, we would be coming up at the end of the month, we'll be coming up on the 60-day window, that the contractor needs to hold the price in place. So there is something there that we just, will help kind of drive the deadline a little bit as well. But anyway, for the purposes of tonight, I just want to let folks know that that's where we stand.
Thank you. Is there anything else for the good of the order? Before we close up? All right. I'm gonna make a motion to adjourn then. Can I have a second?
Second,
Second by Ms. Dreyer. Roll call?
Mr. Capel?
Yes.
Jerry?
yes.
Mayor St. John?
Yes.
Mr. Grumney?
Yes.
4 yeas, we are adjourned.